are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, all about finding and engaging your customer advocates. Please post your questions, any questions you can think of throughout the session during the webinar, and we'll come to those at the end. Our presenters today are going to be SDI Industry Analyst Scarlett Bays and Head of Service Transformation Matt Groening, and they should both be on the line with us now. Hi Scarlett, hi Matt.
Hi.
Hi Zoe.
Thanks for joining us today, both of you. What we'll do is I'll hand straight over to Scarlett, and you're, I believe, doing some slides first, and then Scarlett, you can hand over to Matt when you're done. And as I say, any questions throughout, do post them, and we'll come to those at the end of the session. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Zoe. So I'm going to be giving you an introduction into customer advocacy. So I'm going to take you through what customer advocates are and how customer advocacy can fit into a continuous service program, the 5 steps for creating a customer advocacy program, the benefits of customer advocacy, and finally the possible problems that could arise and how to overcome them. But before we get into that, let's have a quick look at what the SDI standards say about customer advocacy. So it's defined as service desk management actively encourages customer-centric behaviours and has processes in place in order to satisfy customer demand in a timely and cost-effective manner. This is a perfect example of how customer advocacy, how a customer advocacy program can slot into a service desk, because a way to ensure this standard is met would be to actively consult the end users of a service desk to understand how to best tailor the service to fit their needs. One way to identify which users will give you valuable feedback is to know which ones are your advocates. So what exactly are customer advocates? Well, they're users of your product or service who are willing to promote and recommend your service to other industry professionals in their network, i.e. via social media. Customers who have used your service might want to share their experiences with their network, which could encourage more users towards your service. There are a few ways to identify your customer advocates. Nowadays, advocates can often be found via social media channels, such as Twitter or LinkedIn. So a simple tweet or post from a customer commending an organisation for a product or service could potentially generate new business. They can also be identified through customer satisfaction surveys. For example, if one customer is particularly praising of your service, then they could be a potential customer advocate. And as we established earlier, a CSI program can also help you identify possible customer advocates as well. Speaking of which, I'll give a little brief surrounding CSI. So a CSI program incorporates a number of processes which can be used to support the development of an IT organisation, allowing it to define, measure and monitor improvements. To break it down, there are 7 steps you can take to implement an effective CSI model. Firstly, you would identify your strategy, so an overview of the model. Next, you define your measurements, your means of measurement or your critical success factors. And from this, you'd gather and process data and then analyse the information against key performance indicators and then use the information to implement improvements. But the key to a CSI program is that once the final step has been completed, you can start the cycle over again, hence continual. However, you need to be sure that your improvements are valuable and will actually have a positive impact on your users. And this is where customer advocates can come in. The SDI standards suggest that service desks should be customer focused. By involving your customers in the CSI process and taking a holistic approach, your service can be tailored specifically to your users' needs. Now I'm going to explain the 5 steps to starting and maintaining a good customer advocacy program. So firstly, you set your objectives, and this will allow you to see how the program and your company are progressing against your targets. And it also enables you to focus your program on fulfilling business-aligned objectives rather than moving the service desk away from your company's aims. Start small and adapt along the way. It can be overwhelming to invite a large number of advocates when starting your program, and it could cause it to ultimately fail. So starting with a few advocates and growing that number over time will allow you to adapt the program to best suit your needs as well as your customers. Add an element of fun. To prevent your advocates getting bored with their tasks, you can include a gamification element. For example, if your program involves the advocates completing tasks or activities, such as including a particular tag in a tweet, a gaming element creates a fun and competitive environment for the advocates and can boost their productivity and output. Assigning the right activities to the right advocates. So one advocate may be stronger at a particular task than another, so you should be careful when assigning the tasks relevant to each advocate's skill set, or they won't be able to perform to their maximum potential. And this reiterates why it's important to start small, so that you can get to know the skills of your individual advocates over time and benefiting both parties. Finally, you should develop connections with your advocates, because they're more than just 140 characters on a screen. They're people and they're your customers. And adding a human aspect to your program, either by talking over the phone with your advocates, meeting them face to face, or sending them little gifts to reward them, will keep them engaged and happy. Now on to the benefits of customer advocacy. We've established that customer advocates can be used to promote your company and give feedback to improve your service. Advocates can also steer users towards a specific part of your service, such as alternative support channels. Furthermore, the collaborative aspect allows different perspectives and insights to be considered that may have previously been overlooked. And lastly, probably the most significant benefit to come out of customer advocacy would be satisfied and happy customers. Involving your customers and truly finding out what they want out of your service and tailoring it to their needs is likely to improve the customer experience. So we've discussed the benefits, but the possible downsides to a customer advocacy program are equally as important to consider. Firstly, budget constraints can inhibit the ability to adequately set up and run a suitable advocacy program. You may also find it becomes difficult to engage with advocates and manage numerous relationships effectively. And after some time, it can be difficult to maintain the advocates if the program is poorly managed. So to take full control of an advocacy program, you need to consider a plan of action before you begin. And there are 4 things you should consider: infrastructure, technology, a content plan, and measurement. The infrastructure is like the terms and conditions of a program, in which you set out, for example, the selection criteria of your advocates, the expectations of both the organisation and the customer, and this is where you would establish the expectation of feedback, and also an internal multi-departmental team to manage and support the advocacy program. This part is necessary to know what to expect from your advocacy program and to understand its worth to your organisation. It's important to establish the technology platform on which to manage and communicate with your advocates. This could be over a social media group, or alternatively, there are several software vendors that offer collaboration solutions and customer communities. Whichever form of communication is used, it needs to be capable of scalability, as an advocacy program can grow depending on the size of your organisation. There's also the option of gamification, as I mentioned earlier. So some vendors offer a game element as a feature of their community software, and this can motivate advocates and encourage them to compete, all the while promoting your service. Creating a content plan allows for effective communication with advocates. It should include what kind of content the advocates are expected to push out, but it can also be a platform for advocates to provide feedback for products and services. For example, if you're developing a product or intend to implement a new feature to your ITSM tool, you can discuss this in the content plan. The advocates can then test the product out and give you feedback before the product is pushed out and promoted by them. Finally, there needs to be a method in place to measure the success of your program. There are multiple ways to do this depending on your type of service. Setting KPIs in line with your business and CSI objectives is the best way to make the most out of your customer advocacy program. For example, a service desk looking to improve their customer experience can implement an advocacy program to inform them of areas where they need to develop their service. To know whether the implemented feedback received from advocates is valuable, the service desk could run a customer satisfaction survey to gauge what has improved, or what still needs work on the user side of things. So that's a little introduction to customer advocacy. I'll hand over to Matt in a minute, who will go into more detail and talk about how to turn your customers into advocates. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and we'll get to them later.
Thanks, Scarlett. Thanks for that. So, yeah, my name is Matt Groening. I'm the Head of Service Transformation at SDI. Just to briefly introduce myself, bit of background. So my role, it's got three elements. One, as head of, I'm responsible for consulting within SDI, so that's developing products and make sure we present them well, and helping on conference calls with leads and opportunities. But the bulk of my role is as a consultant and as an auditor. As a consultant, we deliver health checks, service improvement planning, so that's going into service desk and helping identify areas of success, areas of good practice, but also areas for improvement. We do tool selection, so helping service desk, service operations to identify potentially new tools that they can use, support their customers. But I also I audit against the Service Desk Institute's standard for service desk best practice. So for those of you that don't know, very, very briefly, that's 132 criteria for making a brilliant service desk, developed over about 10 or 12 years. We're on version 7, so we update it every 2 or 3 years, and we update it in collaboration with lots of our associates and colleagues from outside the service desk. So service managers and service desk managers from various organisations, the likes of Axelos are involved as well, and various other subject matter experts. So we audit against that as well, so that's a big part of my job. I've been doing that for about 18 months. Prior to that, I was service delivery manager at an aerospace company in Cambridge. I've been working in IT service management for about 18 years. I've worked in lots of different sectors. I've worked in manufacturing, education, in IT services, and I started as an analyst way back when. I've been a service desk manager. I've been a head of IT. So I've had a lot of various different roles. The bulk of the roles I've had have been in supporting internal service desks, so providing services to internal colleagues. So many of the examples I'm going to go through and give during the course of this session are not going to be particularly relevant for your managed service provider, but I'd like to think that there's enough in there that is appropriate to both. So we've heard some fantastic stuff from Scarlett about the theory behind customer advocacy, why it's important, some of the steps you can take to engage with your customers to formalise the process and link it into CSO. What I'm going to do is talk about specifically turning customers into advocates, so creating that advocacy, a bit more detail about the customer experience and how that can be used to create advocates. So an advocate is someone who supports, who champions, recommends or promotes your service, and the background to that support, the reason why they're a customer advocate is because they've had a good customer experience and they want to share that. So if you create and provide a good customer experience, you will create advocates. And what do we mean by customer experience? So a customer experience is the sum total of your customer's interaction with your team and with your service. So when we talk about the service desk and we talk about customer interactions, we think about phone calls and emails, we think about incidents and requests, but actually the customer experience is much, much broader than that. It starts before they contact the service desk and continues long after. So if you think about, to illustrate the point, a new starter joining a company, their customer journey actually starts potentially before they've started in the role. It will start with them going on your website to look for vacancies or look for information about the company for an interview. It will the customer experience is informed by what happens during the interview. Did they need to use IT to make a presentation? Did they trip over a cable on their way in? That will give them a negative customer experience about the IT service. And if they're successful and they get the role, the induction will also inform their customer experience. And this is a personal example. I started with a new company, and it was an induction day. The health and safety officer came in to do a presentation, but he couldn't get the projector to work and grumbled for a good 10 minutes about how bad the IT was. And as someone who's taking over the IT, a big part of the IT department, it was very interesting to hear, but I know that would have given the other people in the room a very negative experience. And it goes on into the hardware and software you provide for your new starters and any proactive communication and engagement you have with them. So incident management is critical to success, but it is only one part of that broader customer experience. And those customer experiences are passed on, so that your customers will pass on good experiences and bad experiences to the people they speak to. I'm going to stick with my new starter journey and think about when they start and they need to contact IT support for the first time. They may say to a colleague, I need to contact IT support. How do I do that? And if their colleague's perception is poor and they're not an advocate of your service, they're going to pass on that negative perception straight away and say, well, you might as well not bother, they never answer the phone, or something similar. So the customer experience is negative again before that first interaction. But if, on the other hand, that new starter is told that the service desk is wonderful, they're helpful, polite, supportive, they're more likely to see that any problems that they have as a blip, as a one-off, this is not the norm, and they're more likely to accept a simple apology rather than raise a complaint, and they will pass on that positive perspective to others. Their advocacy will create further advocates. I've used the word perception and perspective quite a lot, and I think this quote is a really good one about perception. It's taken from Kate Zabrisky's book, Customer Service Excellence. It's actually from the 90s, so you may have seen this before. But the quote is, the customer's perception is your reality. What that means is it doesn't matter how good you think your service is. It doesn't matter how good your stats are. It doesn't matter that your servers are up 95% of the time, or you're answering 80% of the calls in 30 seconds. It's the customer's opinion that counts. Their perception is your reality. If you want advocates, as I've said, you need to ensure good experiences, good customer experiences. How do we do that? Well, we start by understanding your customers' needs. What do they need? What do they expect? Part of my role is going around the country and then to various different IT departments. Part of that is speaking to customers. I always ask them the same question: what do you need your service desk to provide? What are your needs, expectations, and requirements? And broadly speaking, everyone wants the same 4 things. And I'm going to share that with you so you don't need to ask. So the 4 things that every customer needs is they want access to the technology that they need to allow them to do their job, and they want that technology to work. Second thing is, if it doesn't work or they need something different, they want to be able to contact the right person as quickly as possible. Thirdly, they want that person to deal with it immediately, but all customers I've spoken to accept that that is not always possible. So if it's not resolved on first contact, then fourthly, they want to know when it will be dealt with, and they want to be updated until the point that it is. So IT should be that simple. That is a very stripped down and basic version because it doesn't take into consideration the limitations we have on our service. We have unplanned absences. We never have enough staff. We have staff turnover, so new people coming in, and we have impositions coming from other areas of the business. We have new services being introduced, maybe not with the appropriate handover or documentation. We have changes to our existing services that maybe haven't been tested thoroughly enough or not approved. And of course, we always have human error. Those things happen. They're not really controllable, or they're difficult to control. But if we're going to create a fantastic customer experience, what we need to do, and this is one of the important messages out of this session, we need to try and satisfy everyone all the time. So I'm going to go back to our 80% target. If you've got an 80% target or 90%, 95% target, I think that sends the wrong message to the analysts, to your staff doing the job. What it says to me is that if you fail to deliver on this occasion, it doesn't really matter, because we can just pop it into that 20% that we're allowed to fail, or that 5% where we're allowed to fail. It doesn't give the message that we need to satisfy everyone all the time. I'm going to come back to the 80% thing probably 4 or 5 times over the course of the next 20 minutes. So yeah, try and hold on to that thought. But finding out the detail of what customer requires, it takes, we've talked broadly speaking about the 4 things, but we need active engagement with our customers to find out specifically what they need. So you talk to your customers, you engage with them, find out what they want, but that engagement gives you the opportunity to explain what you can reasonably achieve, explain those impositions and those limitations. It gives you a chance to manage their expectations. But customer engagement creates a virtuous circle. You create advocates through good service, you engage with them, and that maintains and enhances the advocacy because they feel like they're being listened to. They know that they've got that communication with you. You're able to understand their needs in more detail, you can improve the service, you can focus, you can target their support, by which I mean you can give them messages to get back to their colleagues that they can pass on, whether that's, we had a pretty tricky time last week, but we got over it. That we're really busy right now, or we had these successes and we want to share those. And by doing that, you create more advocates by that word of mouth, by that association. So there are a couple of different types of engagement. The first one I'll talk about is engaging with them in a structured and formal way. I think you probably guessed what the other type is from that as well. Direct engagement, by that we mean a formal, structured approach. BRM is a classic example. And what we're really going to talk about is all around BRM, or business relationship management. If you have that function within your organization, it's a really good route. But you may not, or if you do, you may find that you're not able to involve yourself. Maybe the business relationship managers have already got their formal structure and they're not really keen for you to be involved. So you may need to put something together. So what I'm really talking about on this slide is the things you can do to achieve that. The first thing to do is create an engagement matrix. Now, it sounds quite complicated, but really it can be very, very simple. You take a copy of your company org chart, there's your engagement matrix, you highlight all of the customer groups and identify who would represent them, who could be a representative for that customer group, who in IT should be meeting with them, because it doesn't always have to be you if you're creating this matrix. You can spread it amongst your team or the wider department, and it helps help build those relationships, the broad relationships within beyond IT into your customer groups. When you're creating that customer matrix, the engagement matrix, be careful when you choose your audience, and it's something that that Scarlett alluded to earlier. It's about quality, not quantity. It's about people who are appropriate and representative. So as part of my job, I'm asked to speak to customers, get customer view, and I'll often be booked to speak with the CEO. Actually, that's no good. They aren't able to give customer feedback because they rarely engage on an operational level with IT. They have someone do that for them, and they are the sort of people that that you need to engage with in this scenario. So the PAs, the admin team, the people with, as I put on the slide, the widest reach and the greatest influence, the people between us, the people with the biggest mouths, they're the people to engage with. And I'd encourage you, it's a painful experience, but try and engage with those detractors, those people who are difficult customers, because if you can win those over, and then you can do an enormous amount of good to the perception of your department if you can take out one or two of the people who are criticizing it publicly. Your engagements should be structured, consistent, so it doesn't matter who within your world is delivering that engagement. You're getting the same messages across. Scarlett talked about making those fun and encouraging interaction. Absolutely right. At the very least, you should always have biscuits in those meetings. And if you can do anything else to get people to attend, that's one of the biggest problems I've found is getting people to regularly turn up. What I've done in those situations is, rather than have a standalone meeting, rather than make them come to me, I've tried to get myself an agenda item on their team meeting, on their monthly meetings, and then you've got a captive audience, and it may be a shorter period of time, but you should be able to cover most of what you need to in that time, and encourage them to see the value in those standalone meetings. think about the agenda as well. Think about the things you're going to talk about. It's not all about KPIs. The customers tend not to be that interested. It's about the experience. It's about what they're feeling. It's about their pain points. And it's not about fixing the problem in the room. It's about you taking that problem away and working with it, analysing it, and working with the team to create a solution. As I said, there were two types of engagement. So indirect engagement, and by this I mean the less formal stuff, the stuff where it just happens. And I would encourage all of you to get your teams involved in this sort of activity. If you are at a traditional service desk, the analysts will only talk to the customers, broadly speaking, when the customer has a problem. Customers tend. So this is an opportunity for you and your staff to engage with your customers in a positive way, in a non-break fix scenario, and you can influence customer perception and advocates through this indirect engagement. So think about social committees, environmental groups, charity work. You can put on some charity events, any cross-functional initiative, anything that's going on. Get your team involved. And the bottom example is way back in the day when I started on the service desk. The service desk manager found out that a few of us played instruments, and we arranged a Christmas gig in the atrium of the building we were working in. Our manager gave us time off to practice, and I think on the day there was about 300 people turned up, walking through, passing through the atrium. Other members of the team dressed up in Christmassy outfits, and they went around collecting donations. We raised hundreds for the charity. We were in the company magazine, but it improved the perception of IT and the service desk more than any number of BRM meetings could have. So the point is to be bold and be creative. Try and think of new ways to engage with your customers. And the name of the band, that's what the name of the band was. The Red-Nosed Trouser Elves. So from Red-Nosed Trouser Elves to continual service improvement. So what I want to talk about here really is inputs and outputs. So inputs, this information comes to you in very many ways. It comes through formal structured BRM activity. It comes through complaints, compliments, and suggestions. Periodic surveys, so they're the annual surveys or monthly or quarterly surveys that go out. Event surveys are surveys that are triggered by an event, usually the closing of a ticket or a remote connection. You get information in cross-functional meetings, in general meetings where people will say, I had this experience, can we do something about it? And corridor conversations, or at the coffee machine or at the water cooler, those informal chats. You've got this information coming in a number of different routes, and so what I really want to do is encourage you to capture this information. There's absolute gold in there, and if you capture it in a single repository, it means that the information is reviewed, it's measured, it's linked to CSI. You can it helps you understand your problems. You can find commonality, you can find duplicates where groups of people are experiencing the same issues, and it helps as a driver for change. You can act, but it helps you identify where you have made a change and measure that that's happened. What I would encourage is for you to create the process for compliments, complaints, and suggestions within your ITSM tool. So just as you have incidents and requests, so you have suggestions. It means everything's logged. It can be assigned to the right person. You can measure how many you're getting, how many you're closing with the no action taken, how many you're closing with the move to CSI, continual service improvement. And most importantly, it gives you the opportunity to feed back to those stakeholders that their input was evaluated and how it was used, whether you're able to deliver tangible benefits or business value, whether unfortunately on this occasion it was not cost effective for you to make a change. But it means that they know that you're listening and know that you're evaluating what they've got to say, and it encourages them to give you their suggestions and the next time and the time after that. Otherwise, they may not bother. it gives you the opportunity to say, we have made a deliberate change to this this area, rather than them noticing that it's better but thinking it was just by chance, or that's just the way it happened. I wanted to share with you a couple of cautionary tales. So just where customer engagement, feedback, improvement planning, where it goes wrong. It's a couple of examples, and the first one I've called Cold Lasagna. This is it's a true story. It's an organisation I was working for. I wasn't there, but a good friend of mine was in a board meeting, and the CEO was reviewing a recent customer event, and the CEO made the observation the lasagna was cold, and the board that surrounded the CEO were nodding and murmuring in agreement. It's not good enough. We need to tell the catering company we should never use this catering company again. And again, the board continued to nod in agreement. And this is probably a cautionary tale around the command and control kind of environment that can sometimes be created. But my colleague Neil, he spoke up and said, well, who had the lasagna? Which one of you had the lasagna? And no one in the room had eaten it. And when they got down to the detail, actually it turned out that only one person had complained, but they'd gone straight to the CEO. And this person was known, this attendee was known. They were known as someone who was a bit of a habitual moaner. And actually then one person pointed out that they saw them turning up to the event late, long after the food had been served. So food doesn't stay warm forever. And what we ended up with is a situation where you've got quite a large organisation, big employer in the area, very close to ceasing a 10-year relationship with a previously reliable partner, damaging that supplier's reputation. It could have led to, I don't know, job losses. Certainly would have caused major disruption to that company, based on the feedback from one grumpy, ill-informed, and slightly late customer. So the point is, it's essential that you review, analyze that feedback you get. And there's a proverb which is the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and in that story is the customer that complains the loudest who gets the attention. But as we've seen, we shouldn't base any decisions like that on the squeakiest wheel, and just getting that feedback from a customer is not an excuse to act without proper evaluation, without problem formulation, analysis, and interpretation. So ensure that you get feedback that reflects the needs of a broad range of customers. Engage with your customers, yes, but if you get feedback from one or two slightly more vocal customers, it doesn't necessarily need acting upon. And the microwave. So I have another story as well to share. So because the opposite of the squeaky wheel proverb is also true. If you don't hear the squeak, is that a reason not to apply the grease? So decisions shouldn't be made in the absence of contrary evidence, but based on positive supporting evidence. This is a story from my time as I was managing an infrastructure at a company. It's a long time ago, and it's not, to be honest, not the proudest moment of my career, but it does illustrate the point. There were two buildings, a main building and another, separated by a river, and putting in a fibre connection between the buildings was really expensive, so we couldn't do that. It was just one rickety bridge between them. So we tried a couple of solutions. We put in Wi-Fi, didn't have the bandwidth. We put in a laser link, and we thought that was going to do it, but we had loads of complaints about reliability, and so we took a step back, built a business case for replacing it with, it's actually a MMW millimeter wave link, but we called it a microwave link for short. And we had to go through a procurement process. We had to install the new link, and we communicated the change. We cut across, and when we did, everything was right with the world. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. The customers were quiet and happy, or so we thought. It turns out what happened is the customers got bored of complaining, and they were complaining throughout that procurement process. And by the time we'd made the change, and they hadn't seen too great a noticeable improvement, they just stopped complaining. And then there was a staff voice event. There was about 80 people in the room. CEO, different CEO this time, and everyone in the room agreed that the connection was rubbish, but they were bored of complaining, and so we replaced it with something else, and actually it just needed a very we put in a backup link, but it just needed realigning, and it was fine after that. It was a very simple change. As I say, not the greatest moment in my career, but illustrates the point that you need to continue to ask your customers whether things are still running according to their needs and expectations. So that's enough of the war stories, enough of the anecdotes. I want to get back to talking about customer experience and how you manage it. Again, it's part of my engagement with customers. I asked customers whether they see performance reports or KPI reports and management information, and actually I know the answer generally. If it's a less mature service desk, they probably don't report or share that information. If it's a high performing service desk, and actually the customers don't care about the KPIs because their experience is good, so they don't care whether they're shown a table with lots of green all over it saying that the KPIs are good. So senior managers, slightly different. Senior managers, they'll want to see that information, and anyone who's paying for it, they'll want to see that information. But for the end users, they're not actually interested in that, which gives us a little bit of a quandary as service providers, how we measure their experience. So there's a few ways you can do it, and I want to start by talking about the SLA, the concept of the SLA, because I think that's where it starts, and the SLA contains KPIs. Just for to define, when I say SLA, I'm talking about the SLA document, not SLA has kind of become a synonym for KPI target, so I resolve that ticket within SLA. So that's a relevant use of the term, but I'm talking about the document. So it will be written by the IT department or the managed service provider. It tends to be quite wordy document. It's signed off by a customer representative, but not necessarily seen by all the actual customers. It's an important document. It defines the service that's being provided, but it actually rarely includes anything around the customer experience. And as I've explained, I don't really think those targets work. So I've mentioned this a few times. If you're measuring an 80% target, a 90% target, say answering calls within 30 seconds or resolution within SLA, even if you're achieving that target, you're not providing an 80% service to all customers. You're providing an 100% service to 80% of your customers, and you're failing the other 20%. As another example is around uptime. So I've done the maths. If you're providing a 24/7 service and you've got 99.9% uptime, that still allows for nearly 9 hours of downtime. If that was to happen on a single outage, the impact on the business could be huge. I used to work for an IT services company and looked after a system that generated $11 million of business a day. You lose nearly 9 hours of activity, and that's a huge financial impact. If you took retail as another example, if they lost nearly 9 hours, that's pretty much a day's trading. Yet, if there'd been no other outages during that previous year, then that would fall within the SLA target, which is not an acceptable level of service, but it is within SLA. So SLA don't necessarily reflect customer experience, which is why we've moved on, or we're starting to move on towards a new model, which is around an experience level agreement, an XLA. So these are targets that are a blend of customer experiences. So we've talked about the 80%, the 90% calls answered target. So instead of that, change that for all calls answered. So instead of 90% within 30 seconds, all calls are answered within 2 minutes. It tells the customer exactly what service they're going to get, and anything below 100% is not acceptable. And then include measures such as your periodic survey, your event surveys, your compliments process, your complaints process. But the most important thing is to pass on that message to your staff that it is essential. The ambition should be for you to satisfy all of your customers all of the time. So that's pretty much all I had to say. The next slide says summary. Really, this slide is stalling for time. This is an opportunity for you to type in some questions into the webinar tool, and for Scarlett and Zoe to have a look and pick out some good questions. So I am very much stalling for time here while you go away. So don't listen to anything I've got to say. Type a question while I just go through a couple of slides which summarise what I've been talking about. So defining and designing a service for customers, making sure that you consider customers' experience beyond incident and request, continually engage with them, input their thoughts and feedback into CSI, into continuous service improvement. Feedback to your customers how that input is being used. Otherwise, they won't necessarily give you that feedback again. And as I was just saying, SLAs are important, but 80% achievement is 20% failed. So look at experience level agreements, measure the entirety of that experience, ensure your team tries to satisfy everyone all the time, and remember that good customer experiences create advocates. Okay, so it really is time for questions. So I'll hand back to Zoe and Scarlett.
Great. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that, Matt. Oh, bear with us 1 second, Matt.
Okay.
Can you hear a No.
Sorry?
Are you hearing an echo, Matt, on our end?
No, you're loud and clear.
Okay, great. Sorry, carry on.
So we've got a couple of questions. Firstly, do you have any recommendations for dealing with customers that regularly complain?
Okay. Well, it really depends on the nature of their complaint. If they regularly complain about the same thing, and you're not putting it right, then obviously you need to deal with that. And it's I think you need to engage with them. You need to sit down with them, get into the detail of what their complaint is. And my experience is customers hold a grudge. And so only by engaging with them and talking to them about how you can resolve or retrieve the situation, can you stop them complaining. So yeah, you need to work with them on an action plan, find out what they want you to do to improve the service, and regularly meet with them and make sure that plan is being put into place. If they're complaining about nothing, or their complaints are non-specific, as an IT manager, I'd probably want to try and deal with that head on. Often customer complaints are I find that often people are saying something other than what the words mean, and you might find that maybe that person is struggling with the technology. Maybe they need a bit of support and training rather than and maybe that's the reason for the complaint. So maybe go down that route, and if you've got an in-house IT trainer or a training function, then see if you can get them to help. But go to their team meeting. If you go to their team meeting and they complain in front of their manager and their colleagues, then you'll know how valid their complaint is, and whether it's a broad customer experience or whether it's just them and the rest of the people in the room saying, actually, we're fine.
Okay, brilliant. Sorry, we're getting echo.
So you can hear your own voice. That's always awkward.
So Matt, we'll just give you another question and then we'll disappear so that we don't have too much echo affecting things. So in terms of gauging customer happiness, what questions would you kind of recommend as the top ones to make sure you're asking?
It's a good question. I'm reluctant to answer it because the correct answer for me to give is it's for you and your customers to decide. It's for you to. It depends on your organisation. It depends on what type of business you have. You don't want to necessarily make it too informal if you work for a quite formal and maybe slightly old-fashioned company. But if you're working for a young, dynamic, fun company, then it needs to be a light question. I think the advice I'd give is keep it short in terms of, particularly in terms of event surveys. Ask one question, which is, did you get the service you needed, or did it meet expectations? And then give a range of responses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you think about the security section of the airport, I think that's a good example. Give them 5 options, smiley faces, so it's really, really clear. And then if they score 1 or 5, then encourage them to leave a comment or have some follow-up questions at that point. Going back to that, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 response, the most common complaint that I see when I go into service desk, I'll go into the desk and they'll show me their event survey feedback, and it will say 1, excellent service, but then the next one will say 5, excellent service. And so it's where people are not quite sure whether 1 is good or 5 is good. So happy faces and sad faces work really well there as well. But continually review it, speak to your customers to make sure that you are asking the question in the right way, and so have some standard, stable, continued questions that you can use to benchmark, to measure improvement. But it's the other questions, the follow-up questions, they're the ones that you can change. You may want to get some feedback on a particular project or a particular event that's happened.
Thank you, Matt, that's brilliant. So I guess the other thing is, where can people go to sort of find out more about the topic?
Well, there's some good stuff on the website. There's a excellent customer report written by Scarlett that our members would have access to, and there's some resources on the website. Again, I think some of the good stuff is members only, and so if you're not a member, I would encourage you to speak to your account manager about becoming a member. And there are lots of different options. There are sort of different levels of membership that you can choose. So there should be something that's right for everyone's budget, because there is some good stuff out there. Have a look on the events page. We do events on various different topics, and if you particularly want an event, a full day event on customer experience, on managing customer experiences, then request something through the website or through the office, through your account manager, and we'll look to put something on if we get that kind of feedback.
Yeah, exactly, brilliant. And also, anyone who's listening now, this session is being recorded, so we'll share that recording so people can kind of revisit some of the slides and obviously send us in any questions really that they do have afterwards. So we're coming up towards the end of the time. So thank you both again for presenting today and for sharing all of those great ideas with us.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Brilliant. And yeah, if people are listening, if you want to see what our next webinars are that we've got coming up, you'll find those on the events section of our website. And as Matt says, let us know if there's any ideas or anything you'd like to see in future. So thanks again, Matt and Scarlett, and hopefully we'll see you on another webinar soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.